Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
I'm Stephanie Batalino, and thank you for being here for Know Your Rights at Work, Trans Life in 2021 and beyond. And don't we all want to know about that? And I'm here with my new best friend, Denise. Denise.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here tonight. Thank you so much for coming, and we're excited to chat with you. Just as a quick note, we actually cannot see anybody's faces but our own beautiful mugs. So we really encourage you to use the chat to communicate with us because that is our way of interaction. There will be a couple of things that are interactive about this presentation. So if you've got questions, if you've got comments, when you are ready to, when we get to the sort of audience participation part, just make sure to use the chat to talk with us so that we can chat with you. Great.
Awesome. Oh, yeah. And if you have a chance and would like to, please share with us where you're from and perhaps your first name if you're comfortable doing that. It's always good to know where people are from and who they are. So let's rock and roll then. Denise, this is for you.
Wonderful. So I always like to start our work together by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral land of the Coast Salish people, which is the traditional home of all of the tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations, and many, many other nations as well. We honor their past and present existence and the ways in which some of the things that we're talking about in terms of the legal system and workplaces have historically and recently been an instrument to strip Indigenous cultures of identity, land rights, and cultural practices. And that in doing this work, we're committing to being agents of change and honor the ancestral heritage and the current stewardship of the nations of the land that we're on. And I know that there are many really wonderful organizations in the Puget Sound area that are doing native land rights work, doing back to land back movements, including the Protectors of the Salish Sea that have done really, really amazing actions at our state capitol building and protecting the waterways and the environment of the Puget Sound area. And so check out their Facebook page is in the chat, and they're doing really, really amazing work. And also research any, if you're not in the Puget Sound area, any local Indigenous movements to you because they are everywhere. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So what we're going to talk about today in this presentation is Stephanie and I will trade off a little bit. Stephanie will will open us up by talking about the Equality Act and moving from policy to practice. So every workplace has policies, but often where the rubber hits the road is how those policies are implemented. And then we'll pivot to my portion where we'll talk about some common workplace issues and how to solve them. And we'll do some participation around what's legal and illegal in workplaces in Washington.
Great. So, hey, everybody. I'm Stephanie Batalino. I have been, let's see, my story. I came out in 2005. I was the first person in my company at the time, and the company was 165 years old, New York Life. I came out there in 2005, first trans person to ever come out in the history of the company. I often joked with HR during my transition. I said, so do you keep like records of these things? I mean, how do you know that? Is there a secret trans file somewhere that I don't know about? But out of all that, they didn't know what to do. Back in 2005, which wasn't all that long ago, trans people were getting fired left and right for coming out. I thought, well, and they still are today, by and large. I thought that was going to happen to me, quite frankly, but it did not. And while my company certainly wanted to respect my journey in the best way that they could, they had no way of really knowing how to do that. So I basically led them by the hand and worked through what my transition turned out to be. And I'm very grateful for their humanity. But what I realized in all of that, and I remember saying to them, I said, I might be the first person, but I certainly won't be the last trans person that comes out. And so I think that, you know, it was important for me to add my voice to the to the to the to the larger collective at the time that was talking about trans workplace inclusion, because my entire career has been in corporate America, or was in corporate America. I retired a couple of years ago to do this work full time, and 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 it's really a calling for me. And so, because I just feel very strongly that employment for our community, for the trans and the non-binary community, it it it's a it leads to so many other better outcomes for folks with respect to being able to get health care and being able to have a roof over their head and to be able to stay off the street. So it's all about that, and I think it's weaved into all of that. And I currently sit on the board of PFLAG National. I've been on the board for 6 years there and chair their National Business Advisory Council. And that's been very rewarding work. I know PFLAG has a whole bunch of chapters in the Puget Sound area, and they are all very trans inclusive and very trans aware, which is a good thing. I do want to publicly, shamelessly self-promote my upcoming book. It comes out in May. I just got my advance copies today. I'm so excited. Reflections from Both Sides of the Glass Ceiling. It will be available everywhere in May. You can go to my website and pre-order a copy at a discount right now if you'd like. StephanieBatalino.com. It tells my story of not only coming out in corporate America, but what happened on the other side of my transition. I lost my male privilege, and I found myself being treated very differently in my role as a corporate vice president. And there's a lot involved in that, so it's part memoir, but it's also a lot about what I learned from that and what I want to give back to not only our community but to those individuals in human resources and in D&I roles and whatnot. So that's a little bit about me. I am thrilled to be doing this again with Denise. We did this in June for Pride, and I guess we were such a hit that they asked us back. So the band is back together again. Denise, it's over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. So I'm the executive director of Q Law Foundation of Washington. We're an organization that does both free legal services for LGBTQ people throughout Washington. We also do a legal clinic with Ingersoll Gender Center in partnership with their support groups that is actually happening as we speak. I am a lawyer and have been a lawyer since 2009. And I will just tell you a little bit about my history and how I came to be doing trans workplace rights work as my career. Before I became the executive director of Q Law Foundation, I practiced employment discrimination law for about 10 years and represented lots of queer and trans and non-binary folks in that time. So this is an area that I care a lot about. I am not trans, I'm cisgender. And so I do just want to acknowledge that I don't have direct experience with these issues, but I do have, I do want to sort of share that I am partnered with a trans person. And so we co-parent together. I have my own skin in this game. So I know the trans community has a lot of cisgender, I affectionately refer to us as helpy McHelpersons, who sometimes come into community and lend our expertise, sometimes helpfully, sometimes not. I try to be helpful as much as possible, and I know sometimes I'm not. But I do just want to share that is my skin in this game. That is what I care about. And I also was very, very lucky that when I came out about 20 years ago, I came out into a community that was like 60 to 70% trans folks, which for 1999 was such an amazing stroke of luck and a blessing. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about today are specifically some of the ways in which trans women in particular have become the target of attacks recently, and some of the ways in which that that cisgender women are actors in that harm, and in particularly also Black trans women facing incredibly high rates of violence. And so I come into this space with honor and love. I was very fortunate that trans women have been my mentors and supporters and loved ones since I was very young, and have really helped me find my feminism. And so I get particularly heated when I see folks using feminism as a method of excluding trans folks from human rights and from the brilliance that is in the trans community. So thank you all for having me here, and I'm excited to talk about these issues.
Great. Thanks, Denise. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the Equality Act. It's a hot topic right now, and for a lot of good reasons. But I want you all to understand that we're at a very critical phase in the history of where we are with the Equality Act. So I want to talk a little bit about it. I want to ground us all in kind of where we are and what's going to be happening in the days and the weeks, literally the days and the weeks that are ahead of us from this point, from March 3rd, 2021. For those of you that don't know, I thought just a little bit of a history lesson is important to understand, especially when depending on what generation you are and where you are in the trans community. I think it's important for us to understand kind of where we've been. And the Equality Act, as you can see, has been around since 1974. That is a really, really long time. I'm really bad at math. So what's that? 26 plus 20, 47 years. And when it was first devised, when it was first written, it did not include, big surprise, protections for trans people. But over the years, over like the next 20 years, it kept being introduced into every single Congress. And really, essentially, not much happened. But other than its name changed from the Equality Act of 1974 to the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, or ENDA, as many of you might know it as prior to its current iteration as the Equality Act. And what's interesting about the Employment Non-Discrimination, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, pardon me, is that it was exactly just for that. It was narrowly focused on employment discrimination. And yet again, it did not include protections for trans people. So whatever voices we had in the movement back in the 90s, which was arguably smaller than it is today, they were not being heard. And as I mentioned, every single Congress, with the exception of one, had this legislation introduced and essentially went nowhere. But as we moved closer, as we got into the into the 2000s, into the aughts, there was a greater sense of movement, and there was actually, as we got closer to, as we got in 2007, we were actually thinking that there was a lot of positive movement behind it, and we actually thought it might actually get passed. Unfortunately, the debacle, as I call it, my words, debacle of 2007 happened. And basically what happened there was, initially the Equality Act, or the ENDA as it was then, it wasn't the Equality Act yet, had protections for the trans community, for gender identity, gender expression specifically. They were in. But then people were worried, as debate ensued, people in Congress were worried that, well, it's not going to pass because we have the trans stuff in it. And so what if we take the trans stuff out and then it'll have a better chance of passing? The problem is a lot of promises were made to the trans community around that time about being included and not taken out of the legislation. But then we were. And organizations, and I'm not here to organization bash, but back then, a lot of the ire of the trans community was focused on the Human Rights Campaign, on HRC, because Joe Salmonese, who was the executive director of the organization back then, was very clear about keeping the trans protections in until they weren't. And then they were trying to, and as it turned out, the bill didn't pass. As it turned out, a number of many LGBTQ nonprofit organizations, as well as other organizations outside of the LGBTQ space, came out and were basically dissing the bill, saying it's not going to fly if you don't put gender identity back in. So then they added it back in, patched it back in there. But at the end of the day, it never passed. So here we are again, where we started. Unfortunately, back where we started, but unfortunately, the angst and the bitterness, quite frankly, for a lot of organizations that said they were going to support us, a lot of individuals who said they were going to support us and didn't. Believe it or not, it's 14 years ago, but a lot of that animus still exists today, and it's unfortunate, but that really was a result of what happened back in that 2007 to 2009 period. So to say that the history of the Equality Act as it exists today has been a stormy one would be a bit of an understatement, to say the least. So fast forward now to the Supreme Court ruling that we had in Bostock versus Clayton County, the Title VII ruling last year in the Supreme Court. Big win, totally a big win. And I will not for 1 second try to diminish that at all. But let's be real, guys. It's not a panacea. It is strictly narrowly focused on employment. And that's wonderful, especially for someone like me who's been in the trans workplace inclusion space for 15 years. It's going on 16 years. It was important. It took the patchwork quilt away of state level and local level protections for trans people. And we needed that because, and Denise will tell you, there's just, when you have a patchwork quilt, there's too many holes, that potentially things can fall through, and people that should be protected aren't protected. And so in no way do I want to diminish what happened in the Supreme Court last year, but again, narrowly focused to employment. We all knew we needed something more comprehensive. We all knew we needed a fresh piece of omnibus legislation that covered everything. And that is the latest iteration of the Equality Act. If you haven't read it, I would highly suggest Googling it and reading the House legislation. It's obviously not the most gripping reading, but it's important to understand what exactly is in it, because there's a lot in it. And it passed the House during the previous administration in 2019 by a pretty substantial vote, 236 to 173. However, as many of you will recall, it did nothing in the Mitch McConnell-led Senate, was not even taken up. And again, the trans community, the LGBT community writ large, stuck in the middle of partisan politics. So fast forward even more to last week, a week and a half ago, as you probably saw in the news, the Equality Act did pass the House. Yay, 224 to 206, very much on a party line vote. And now it's on to the Senate. And call your senators so that it's top of mind for them. And it's more important for those of you that watch this recording, pass it on to those people that you know that live in red states, because I'm coming to you from California. Traction's in Washington. We know who our senators are there, and they're supportive of this. What's going to get us over the line is making the voices the loudest in the states that are not blue. Quite frankly, that's kind of where we're at. And so it's on to the Senate. And I think there's a lot on the Senate's mind right now with respect to COVID legislation and legislation to get people back on their feet and get checks in their hands, because that's where we need to be as a country, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. The Equality Act is hugely important, but whatever we can do, whatever the government can do to help get us out of where we are right now and get more shots in arms and get people back on their feet and get businesses back open. We all know how important that is, right? For all of us, So the Senate will take it up. It may not happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen. And that's why we need to begin, if we haven't already, to beat the drum and get the message out to our senators. Because it's going to be a very interesting situation in the Senate. And I'll get to that on my next slide after this one. But I just wanted you all to have a sense of how comprehensive the Equality Act. It will amend existing civil rights law, the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Jury Selections and Services Act. All of these acts will be adjusted and amended so we are protected, and there are protections in place for gender identity. And that is so hugely important. And you can see that it covers a lot of ground. It's not just employment anymore. We've moved away. We have evolved from our ENDA days. It's about housing. It's about access to credit. It's education. It's public spaces and services. And because they've put in additional adjustments so that it would even be broader in that category to involve retail stores and banks and legal and transportation services. That's huge. That's huge stuff. Federal funded programs and jury service, because I know that you all want to be able to serve on your local juries. Lord knows I do. That was very tongue in cheek. But moving on, it's very good that it's in there, because it's important that we have a comprehensive protections for us. It's long overdue. We all know that. Our supporters know all that. The Congress, our representatives and our senators, so many are behind this. They get it. But there was a time, I think, earlier on in where we are today in the kind of the saga that is the Equality Act, where I think a lot of people felt that, well, as soon as we get a Biden administration and we get control of the Senate, life is good. Life's a carnival. The passage of the act is going to slide right through, and Joe's going to sign it, and away we go. Well, I hate to be the bearer of not the greatest news, but that a lot has to happen between where we are today and getting to that finish line. Hopefully sooner rather than later. I was doing some research about, the opposition. It's the old saying, right? About, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So as much as it pains me to read some of the stuff that's put out there by the people that oppose this, the Equality Act, it's important to understand where they're coming from. And I came upon this particular story, 7 Reasons Why the Equality Act is Anything But, by the Heritage Foundation. Very, very conservative organization, very right, very far right. And you can see what I found. It would penalize Americans who don't affirm new sexual norms or gender ideology. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can read them. But the thing that got me was This wasn't like from last week. This was from nearly 2 years ago. So it's this sort of mindset that is becoming more and more ingrained in the opposition. And what's happening is we're seeing it now in a lot of state level legislation and a lot of conversation now that's starting to bubble up about the Equality Act that is so hateful and so discriminatory and so despicable and so wrong. Um, it's about trans kids not being able to participate in sports. They're putting all these things in the front and right in the crosshairs of the debate about this bill. And if you've been kicking around the trans activism ranks for any amount of time, you'll know that this is not a surprising development. So often, the trans community is the easy punching bag. You know, the 1% of the American population that gets pulled into this conversation so that they can be the punching bag for the opposition, and that's what's happening. And I'm here to tell you that it's going to get worse before it gets better. We're going to hear more and more things about like some of the drivel that Rand Paul was going off about in the Rachel Levine confirmation hearing last week about gender mutilation and about, and they're going to pull out the bathroom thing again. They're going to. So it's going to be all of that. And they're going to hide behind religious protections. It's going to be all of that. And I don't mean to sound like a naysayer. I think I'm just being real about kind of what we're dealing with. And it's going to be important for us to lock arms and be unified and to combat this once and for all, to get this Equality Act over the line, because it's going to get a little messy, or maybe a lot messy in the Senate, because if you're paying attention at all, you'll know and you can see how divided we are and how it's still a very kind of flinty sort of thing going on in the Senate right now. And the Democratic majority is about as razor thin as you can get. I mean, it's Kamala Harris casting the deciding vote. But we have this thing called the filibuster too, so we don't want to forget about that either. And if you don't know what the filibuster is, Google it. Suddenly, a simple majority doesn't pass legislation anymore, and that, in essence, is the filibuster, and that comes up the works even more. So, bottom line, we need to speak out. We need to be loud. We need to be proud about it. We need to be militant about it. And if I'm coming off a little bit like that, it's because I am. And Denise told me it's okay. And that's kind of where we're at. So if you have questions about it, at the end, you'll see my email, you'll see Denise's email. You can contact us and talk to us about it, but and find out how you can raise your voice into it, because as we all know, the louder our voices, the more we raise each other up, the harder it is for the other side to ignore us. So let me shift gears a little bit from the legislative to the workplace. I do a lot of work and have done a lot of work over the last 15 years with companies great and small with respect to trans workplace inclusion. And one of the things that I always like to talk about is how we need to move the narrative from policy creation to the practical application of the policy. Because when we first were starting out with workplace inclusion more broadly for the LGBTQ community, it was a lot about policy creation, having EEO policy and non-discrimination policies that included not only sexual orientation, of course, but gender identity, gender expression. And we've come a long way in the policy creation, but my mantra has always been, we have to move from policy to practice. Companies can't rest on the HRC's Corporate Equality Index score of 100. That's become kind of the bellwether barometer, if you will, of LGBTQ inclusion for companies in the Fortune 500. And that's wonderful. And you can put out all kinds of PR that says you are an inclusive and welcoming company for LGBTQ employees and candidates. But at the end of the day, are you really as woke as you think you are? Because for me, it has everything to do with taking those inclusive policies that you now have on your company intranet, or God forbid, in a binder collecting dust somewhere in human resources, and imbuing that into the culture of your company. And the way that happens is, and that's how we transform culture. That's how we really do create inclusive workplaces. That's how we make room and make space for trans and non-binary employees to be not just accepted, if you will, but celebrated for the contributions that they make to the enterprise. And that's really where where the narrative is headed. And the interesting thing about this is, you know, I first started talking about policy to practice like in, oh, I don't know, 2010, maybe 2000, around there. And I honestly thought somewhere perhaps that, so here I am, you know, kind of left corporate. I'm very much involved in my speaking and consulting work and writing and everything. And I'm thinking, well, you know, policy to practice, gee, you know, is that still going to fly? Because I thought, well, so many companies have evolved, and there may not be so much of a need for this anymore. Wow, was I wrong? There'll always be a need for this. There'll always be a need for education. There'll always be, because I look at it this way. It's kind of a 3-level sort of relationship. It all begins and ends, and ends, not only in the corporate space, but just in all the activism work that we do for our community. It all begins and ends with education. It really does. Because to so many people, we are kind of a strange, unknown sort of entity. Even for all of the advances we've made in the broader cultural landscape, for many people, they don't have a trans person in their life, so they don't know. Maybe they don't want to know. But at the end of the day, it really is about educating people on who we are and what we're all about, and arguably that we are human just like they are. And I think that education forms a foundation for understanding. At least I hope it does. At least that's what drives me forward in this work every single day. And then ultimately that understanding sows the seeds of acceptance. And I really feel that it moves that way. And we still need to do that. And that's why I continue to do the work that I do. That's why Denise does the work that she does. So it's really moving from policy to practice. And how we do that has a lot to do with understanding what the cultural landscape of companies looks like. What I always like to say to people is, it's like, trans and non-trans. It's like, look, the work that you do every single day, you don't do in a vacuum. There's a backdrop against which all of the work happens every single day. And it's different from company to company. I came out of New York Life. I mean, New York Life was about it's a life insurance company, for crying out loud. It is about you can't get any more traditional brick and mortar and conservative than they are. I mean, when I came out, I thought they were going to just run me out of town on a rail, or throw money at me and make me go away. But the culture of the company said, no, there's a level that we feel very strong. It's one of the guiding principles that the company has, and it's been part of the history. And 2 of them were humanity and integrity. So I was treated with humanity and integrity, believe it or not. I was lucky. And I tell everybody, as far and wide, that I was very lucky, and that it's not like this for most trans people, and for the vast majority of trans people. And it's important for people to understand that don't know. So for me, culture has a lot to do with this. What has even more to do with it is communication and language. How does work happen every single day? It happens by people talking with one another and dealing with each other. For a lot of people that don't know, and I do a lot of trainings in this area, it's the pronoun thing. It's like, oh my God, I don't know what to say to Stephanie because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. All these different terms, cisgender, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're not transgender. Oh, I didn't know. But it's all of that. And to many people that, a lot of straight people, they don't that might be your colleagues at work, they don't know any of this. So how can you imbue um, principles of non-discrimination and inclusion when you can't even talk to trans and non-binary people in the workplace in the course of your daily work? So it's the lifeblood of how work gets done, regardless of culture. So that's why communication and language is very important. And I say continual education on purpose, because if I've learned anything, it's that the need for education is great and it will never end. It will never end. It will never end, because there will always be other people that don't know. And we have to understand that that's how we have to keep banging that drum. But these are the three main principles that I always talk about when we move from policy to practice. It's understanding, the culture and the setting within which you do your work. And I've come across so many different pieces of that. There are companies that totally get it. I'll never forget, I worked with a company in the Midwest, large company. And I always ask my clients, I'm like, so do you have any out trans people that you know of? And they're like, nope, none that we know of. And I'm like, so, but you have me in here to speak, and we have all these trans inclusive policies. I'm helping you work on your transition guidelines. I said, and you still want to do that? They're like, well, yeah, because it's the right thing to do. And they believe that in their heart of hearts. And because that's their culture. It's like, no, 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 no. We understand where things are going, and we need to make sure that as a company, it's important for us to be in the vanguard. And that's where the cultural piece comes in. There are other companies, and New York Life was like that, was like it, where they were more guarded in moving forward. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but they moved at a different speed. And you see that a lot. So that's what moving from policy to practice is really all about. And what I like to say to all of you is, that you exist in companies great and small. Some of you that are on here that are going to be viewing this, just see yourself as the change agent, because you are. Just showing up, being who you are, and telling your story and living your truth every single day is a very, very powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. And don't ever let anyone take your power away. And do your homework, know your rights, understand where the company is with all of this. And we talked about communication, and part of that communication, I'd be doing my undergrad degree in communication a horrible disservice if I didn't tell you that effective communication is a two-way street, and it involves listening as much as it does speaking, which I have a problem with, but that's for another time. Collaboration involves a measure of give and take to a point, I would say. And I say patient education. What I mean by that is not medical patient, but having the patience to continually educate, because, you're going to need it. And then last but not least, ground yourself in your own personal sense of integrity. What I always like to say to groups that I'm training, that may have been hearing the language for the first time, I'll say to them, I understand that I'm throwing a lot at you, and a lot of this might seem like it's coming from Mars for some of you. But at the end of the day, if you let your own personal sense of integrity and grace guide your actions, then 9 times out of 10 you're going to be okay. You might make a mistake, but you're gonna. It's an error of omission, not commission, and I think that's also important to understand, because it's very hard sometimes, and John Lewis, God bless him if he was still alive, would say that it's hard sometimes to stand firm while you're being harangued by those that don't understand you. But when you're rooted in your own sense of grace and integrity, it's much easier to do that. And you're sending a very, very powerful message in doing so. So it's humanity, integrity, respect, collaboration, communication. That's all the things I've just been talking about. And now you've heard me talk long enough. Now it's time for you to hear some wonderful words from Denise. So Denise, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. One of the things I really like about what you cover in your presentation is the difference between policy and practice, and then kind of how you can show up in the workplace. And I will tell you, I have sued a lot of employers. I have gotten very close to suing even more employers, and every single one of those employers had a beautiful handbook with a lovely recitation of all of the inclusive policies. And the problem was that they were not practicing them.
Amen.
Yeah. So you've got to have both. Good. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of the basics of workplace protection laws. I will say that this is specific to Washington. So I'm not going to, you'll see some references to Washington law in here, but many of the tactics, even if you're not based in Washington, are going to be helpful for kind of how to navigate, making sure that you kind of set yourself up for your best possible legal position, no matter where you are. So I am ready for the next slide. So you'll hear a lot in the law about sex discrimination, right? That's the sort of umbrella term for the protections in workplace laws that protect all people, frankly, all employees, but specifically that also protect trans folks. So if you're looking in a state or federal law for where it says gender identity protection, you're going to be, in most cases, looking for a while. There are very few states that cover that explicitly. But particularly under federal law and in the U.S. Supreme Court case that just came out in June, we're looking at the term sex discrimination. And what the courts have held is that sex discrimination with respect to trans folks in the workplace covers 4 main areas. Sex discrimination covers discrimination based on your appearance. So if you appear masculine or feminine or gender neutral or gender expansive in different amounts than folks might associate with the stereotype of your gender or the pronouns that you use or the body that you were born with, that is discrimination based on appearance, and it is sex discrimination. It also encompasses discrimination based on who you have relationships with. So, and the gender of the people that you have relationships with. It includes your history. So were you born and assigned at one gender at birth and have a different gender now? Maybe you have a mismatch in your Social Security file. Maybe you have a difference between how your the information, the name that you put on your resume versus the name that's on your IRS documents. All of that is about your gender history, and that is also protected under sex discrimination. And if you are transitioning on the job, that is protected as a function of sex discrimination. So that those 2 little words, and I know one of them is a long word, but those 2 little words do a lot in terms of securing your rights in the workplace. All right, next one, please. So state and federal laws, when we talk about employment discrimination, what that term includes is a whole lot of stuff. Basically, discrimination is another word for different and worse treatment. And that can show up in any stage or any area of employment. So it could be in the hiring process, it could be in promotions, what opportunities are available to you versus another employee, which job you're placed in. I see that kind of a lot. We would really rather you work in the back of the house kind of stuff. That is discrimination. And a A lot of other areas are sort of how your work is viewed by your peers or your supervisors, how complaints are investigated, things like that. And then, of course, interpersonal treatment. And where you often see interpersonal issues with interpersonal treatment, you might call that harassment. That's the legal term, but that can be any number of things. And I'll dive into that more in a second. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about Washington law, and I put some of the citations to Washington law down at the bottom of these slides because, you know, if employers believed you, you wouldn't be here learning about your workplace rights. So it's always nice to have the citation to the law to turn to. So what in Washington is defined as illegal discrimination or harassment, right? Because those are two big general terms. So specifically, what those terms can include are requiring a person to use a restroom that's not consistent with your gender expression or gender identity, intentionally misgendering or dead naming a person. We haven't had the opportunity to test this one in the courts, but oof, this is one I saw a lot. You know, oh gosh, it's just that Bob is, you know, he has a tough time with these things, right? We've got to give him some time. Well, if Bob has had 2 to 3 months, Bob has had enough time. And at this point, Bob is being willfully ignorant and is intentionally misgendering or dead naming. Outing people, whether it's done in good faith or not. If your coworkers are sharing things about your relationships, your appearance, your history, your gender, if you're out for gender affirming care leave and someone at your workplace is talking about, well, I think that they're out doing, you know, because they're trans, right? Those kinds of things, that's outing, even if it is done in good faith, right? We have a lot of so-called allies who I think sometimes like to share information that isn't theirs to share. Asking unwanted personal questions, again, that can be very well-meaning, but when they are unwanted questions, that can fall under the definition of discrimination and harassment. And then, of course, dress codes. Dress codes are complicated. We're still kind of, legally speaking, we're still hammering those out. The upshot of it is that an employer should not be requiring you to adhere to a dress code that doesn't fit your gender. There's lots of ways that can get more complicated than that, but that's sort of the takeaway for now. Next slide, please. All right, so one really important thing that happened in 2020 is that Washington passed a new definition of race discrimination under our state employment discrimination law. And that is really, really important because race is such a huge factor in how discrimination occurs, right? We can't separate out racial discrimination from trans-related discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, that umbrella term of sex discrimination. I mean, I think we all know that bigots are not particularly picky. And so it's really important that, you know, to make sure that you know that you have rights in both areas. And the new definition in Washington of race discrimination, I really am very happy about it. It's very useful because it includes definitions. So things like experiencing discrimination or harassment around traits that are attributed to race or that are actually connected to race and ethnicity. This could be stereotypes or it could be accurate things, but if those things are getting in the way of your employment relationships or they become about who you are as a person or your quality as an employee, that can be discriminatory. Discrimination based on hair texture, no touching. No, you cannot touch a Black person's hair. And things like particular hairstyles that are traditionally associated with a particular race. And we most often see this with respect to Black employees, where employers will say things like, you know, particular hairstyles, locks, and particular kinds of braids, cornrows, things like that are not professional and are not allowed in the workplace. That is under Washington State's new definition as of 2020. That is race discrimination, and it's against the law. I also will say for traits, I consider that to include things like cultural attire or jewelry, because I think those are also areas where employers sometimes will say, "Oh, that's not professional because it's too ethnic," things like that, and that, and in my reading, is also against the law. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to do a little participatory game, legal versus illegal. So, question 1, changing your work email to your correct name, is that legal or illegal? Changing your work email to your correct name, legal or illegal? So drop it into the chat. Stephanie, what do you think? Legal or illegal?
Legal.
Legal. All right, let's go ahead and put it up. Are we correct? It is legal. Yes, you can have your work email in your correct name. You can also have your name tag. You can also have the little doodad that goes on your door. You can also have the thing that you put, the thing that you introduce yourself as. All of those things, all legal. And this is regardless of whether you have gone through a legal name change. So lots of employers say things like, "Oh, well, we'll happily change your email as soon as you go through a legal name change." Nope. They got to change it to the name you are using. Your legal name is what goes on your tax documents. That is different. Okay, next one. Making you use the gender-neutral bathroom when you are not non-binary. Legal or illegal? Good job, folks in the chat. Making you use the gender-neutral bathroom when you are not non-binary. Do we think that's legal or illegal? Stephanie, what do you think?
It's very illegal.
It is very illegal. Yes, correct. And that is, again, also true regardless of what your body is like, regardless of what's on your birth certificate, regardless of what's on your driver's license. Under Washington law, you get to use the bathroom that is the best fit for your gender identity, and your employer cannot say things like, well, we'd really appreciate it if you'd use the single stall restroom because some folks are uncomfortable. Nope. Those uncomfortable folks can go use the single stall restroom. All right, next one. Let's see. Allowing you to use PTO, FMLA, or other kinds of leave to cover your gender-affirming care appointments. Allowing you to use PTO, FMLA, or other leave to cover your gender-affirming care appointments. What do we think? Got a couple of things coming in.
Got a legal. We got I use both.
Yes, yes. Stephanie, what do you think? Legal or illegal?
Absolutely legal.
100% legal. So gender-affirming care is just like any other kind of medical or mental health care. And so it is legal for you to use it using your PTO, FMLA, or any other kind of leave. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to, and it really depends on your employer and things like that. But your employer does not get to, charge that as part of your, charge that against you as some sort of like different kind of absence. It's just like any other kind of medical or mental health care. Okay, number 4. Telling you Bob in accounting is trying, but your pronouns are hard. Let's see. Is it legal or illegal for your employer to tell you, well, Bob is trying, but your pronouns are really hard? Illegal AF. I'm not even going to wait. Yes, I love that response. It is illegal AF.
Love that. Oh my God.
Good. All right. So we've got, that one is illegal. Nice job.
Bob's got to get with the program, Denise. Oh my God.
That's right. That's right. Bob sounds like kind of an a-hole. All right. Next one, dress coding you for the same outfits that your cis coworkers wear. Is that legal or illegal for your employer to dress code you for the same outfits that your cis coworkers wear? What do folks think? Illegal or legal? All right. Stephanie, what do you think?
Oh, it's illegal. It's
Illegal. I'll repeat it one more time. Dress coding you for the same outfits your cisgender coworkers wear. So if you're wearing, and I actually had this fact pattern in a case, and it drove me absolutely up the wall because the employer was not with me on that. We talked about that one for a long time. But yeah, if your cisgender coworkers wear shirts that, if they are leaning over their desk and their shirt pulls up from their waistband a little bit, and they don't say anything to them, and they say something to you, oh, that's too revealing, right? That's illegal. Got to treat people equally. That's the whole idea. All right, next one. We only got a few more. All right. Legal or illegal? Writing up Bob in accounting for telling all the new hires there's something different about you. Is it legal or illegal for your employer to write up Bob in accounting for telling all the new hires there's something different about you?
It's illegal.
It is legal.
Oh, it's legal.
Yes. I gave you a little bit of a double negative.
Oh, we can write up Bob. Yes.
Okay. So sometimes employers will say, well, then, we have to honor Bob's rights. Blah, blah. No. It is, and in fact, I put it in this column because the point I wanted to make is that it is illegal for Bob in accounting to do that. And because remember, that's that outing that we talked about. And your employer has a responsibility to address that. So your employer actually has a responsibility to intervene. So Bob in accounting is cruising for a bruising here in the form of a write-up and in the form of, and it should result in termination. So a couple of questions came through. One question is about the dress code. If your dress code is unisex, does that change things? So the closest answer to that question is no, right? Because many employers don't have a dress code. And so, for example, and so your dress code is by definition unisex, or your employer will have a dress code that's like wear a, blue top and brown pants or whatever. But it's really about how are you treating people? Remember that definition of discrimination is, are you treating people differently and worse? Two groups of people or two different types of people differently and worse. So that's the question to ask is, if you're getting heat for something as a trans person and you're looking around and your cisgender coworkers are doing the same thing, or if you're getting heat as a Black person or a brown person and your white coworkers are doing the same thing and nobody's saying anything, then you're looking at a discriminatory situation because you're being treated differently and worse. So good question about what if your employer doesn't intervene? We're going to talk about that next. So don't worry. We're not just playing a game for you to not have any tools. That's the next couple of slides. All right, let's see. Where did I leave off here? Bob in accounting. All right, Bob in accounting needs to GTFO. Let's see. Legal or illegal to let customers harass you or misgender you? Is it legal or illegal? So another way of saying this is, does your employer have a responsibility to intervene if customers, not your coworkers, but customers are misgendering or harassing you? Legal or illegal? What do you think, Stephanie?
Illegal, for sure.
Illegal. A lot of times employers will say, well, I don't have any control over what people say when they come in here. Well, you can kick them out. In fact, you have an obligation to. I recommend that employers write themselves a little script. Stephanie is a valuable member of our team and a hard worker, and we believe that she should be treated fairly, and we don't accept anything different than that. Thanks for taking your business elsewhere. It's very easy. You write a little script, you give it to everybody, and your problem is solved. All right. Legal or illegal? Last one. Promoting you because you are good at your job and a valuable team member. Legal or illegal? Promoting you because you are a valuable team member and good at your job. Legal or illegal? And I'm just gonna give this one to you. Yes, of course it is legal. And that is what your employer should be doing, is looking at who you are as a person, what your attributes are in the workplace, what your skills are that you bring to the workplace, and treating you in accordance with that, not anything with respect to your gender, not anything with respect to your race or a disability. all of those things together, right? You are a valuable team member in the place that you work. You are good at your job. Well, make sure you're good at your job.
Yeah.
But you are good at your job, and you should have every opportunity to succeed at your job and learn the skills you need to be good at your job that your coworkers have. So thank you for playing legal and illegal. You have been an amazing team. You are all winners.
We have
All
lovely
right,
we have lovely parting gifts. Actually, we don't.
Well, the lovely parting gift is, let's go to the next slide and talk about what do you do if that doesn't happen, right? Because this is, you know, if we could just play legal and illegal all day and that was the end of the story, then I would have been out of a job a long time ago. So there's a couple of different things that you can do to navigate when you're having trouble at work. And so first we'll talk about affirmative connections that you can build. So, and this is going to be different for every workplace, but affirmative connections that you can build are, does your workplace have an LGBTQ affinity group? Right? That's a great place to start, to make connections, find out what the vibe is at your workplace, get some intel about, you know, which parts of the workplace are good to work in, which parts of the workplace are not great to work in, which manager to watch out for, right? One of the queer and trans community's strengths is that we take care of each other and we have survival networks, right? We talk to each other and we tell each other what's up. We tell each other what to watch out for. We tell each other important information. How do you navigate the courts? How do you do this? How do you, right? Like, which doctor is a good doctor, right? We do this all the time, and your workplace is no different. You want to connect with and think about friendships with your cisgender coworkers who will put their name on what they see, right? I've had so many cases where people say, you know, I have some good friends at work, but they're really scared of retaliation. And so I don't think they're going to stand up for me. Well, that person isn't your friend, right? You need to be thinking about building relationships and alliances in the workplace with cisgender people who are not afraid to speak up, right? And not afraid to see what's happening to you and to be willing to put their name on it. Now, they don't have to like lead the charge, but if push comes to shove and you have to go to HR, and we'll get to that in a second about reporting, but if you have to go to HR and say something is happening to me, and, you know, Suzanne was standing there when Bob in accounting told the new hire that there was something different about me and, you know, started waggling his eyebrows like a fool, right? Suzanne needs to be willing to put her name on that, because without that, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. Connecting with a supportive manager, particularly if you're transitioning on the job. But in any case, having a supportive manager or being able to sort of connect with a supportive manager who is going to help you navigate the workplace, give you some mentorship, give you some resources, be willing to, like in those manager meetings that maybe we're not all in, right? Be willing to advocate and speak up. That's going to be really, really helpful. Even if they're learning, right? You can sort of manage up a little bit and train that supportive person about how to be a good ally, and how to be a good accomplice in the workplace, and then have that person in place to be able to do those things. So those are some of the connections. Now let's talk about reporting. So with reporting, the way that it works legally is that your employer needs to be put on notice that a potential illegal situation or discriminatory or harassing situation is developing. So that means that, particularly if it's peer-to-peer, right? If somebody or customer to you, if somebody is harassing you, discriminating against you, you need to take it to your supervisor first, because that person is the person who has the duty to intervene. Maybe that person is the supervisor. In that case, you go to HR. Many companies, particularly if you work for a big company or a big chain, they will have a corporate number, and you should look in your employee handbook. Your employee handbook is actually a good document to have, not because it means your employer is going to follow it every single time, but it gives you the information like, am I supposed to report discrimination to this 1-800 number? Or am I supposed to report it to my supervisor? Or is there a point person for on-the-job transition, right? There's just a lot of valuable information in there. And so it's just handy to kind of have a copy of that kicking around to look at. Some employers don't give you a hard copy. They make you look it up on some intraweb. That drives me absolutely up the wall, but unfortunately that's perfectly legal. So when you make a report to your supervisor, to HR, to this corporate number, you are not expecting that they are going to solve the problem. If they do, that's rad, but they may not. A lot of times people say, well, HR is just there to back up the company. Correct. That is their job. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't tell them when there's a problem, even if you have no belief that they will resolve that problem. Because at the end of the day, your choice is, do I continue to work here with this problem? Or do I make the problem known and figure out how I'm going to exit this workplace? And maybe you exit the workplace with a legal claim. Maybe you don't, right? Maybe you just exit and you find another better job, right? That, frankly, is always my preferred option because I think it makes things a lot easier for you, right? Life is too short to stay at a job just because you maybe one day would have a legal claim, right? The legal system is not that trustworthy. But when you make that report, you want to make sure that you put it in writing, put your name on it. Anonymous reports are not going to solve anything about the problem you're facing. And you want to be detailed, right? Don't be afraid to tell your employer how big of a problem that they have, right? So if Bob in accounting is misgendering you, right, make sure you tell them about all of the instances and when it started. Don't just say, Bob keeps misgendering me, it's really getting to me, right? That makes them think their problem is this big, and so they're only going to solve a problem that's this big. You have to tell them they have a problem that is this big and make them solve a problem that's that big. And I know a lot of times people are worried about retaliation. That's super real. But retaliation is not more likely if you report a problem and make it look this big versus that big. Retaliation is built in, right? Which I feel terrible saying because, you know, it's because it's not very happy. But at the end of the day, if you were going to experience retaliation at all, and you might not, it doesn't matter how big you report. It's going to happen one way or the other. It doesn't happen in every single instance, right? Many employers handle things really, really well. I never got phone calls from people whose employers handle things well because nobody calls a lawyer because they're having a good day, right? That's not how that works. But you want to make sure you put your name on your report, put it in writing. HR will always say, well, let me give you a call to talk about this. The way you navigate that is you say, great, I'll have that call with you. After the call, you say, thanks so much for such a great call. It was really good to talk to you about bang, 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 everything you talked about on that call. My understanding is that the action items from here are bang, right? Now you have it in writing. All right, so lawyering up. You can decide at any point that you want to talk to a lawyer. Q Law Foundation has a free LGBTQ legal clinic for anyone in Washington. It is all by phone, and it's the first and third Thursday of every month. And we'll have a link at the end to sign up for that. You can talk to a free lawyer there. We talk about workplace issues all the time. You can also contact Lavender Rights Project, which is another fantastic Washington organization, or you can talk to a private lawyer, and that can be anybody. And often we refer people to private lawyers, or it might be that you know someone who has gone through a legal issue and you want to use the same lawyer they did. That's awesome. You can also report to governmental agencies, and in some cases, for some types of legal claims, you have to. The EEOC, for example, is an agency that you should always be thinking about reporting to as a very early step in your process. You also have the Washington State Human Rights Commission, although pro tip, they are like 6 months behind in investigations right now, so they are not going to be quick. The Seattle Office for Civil Rights, if you're in the city of Seattle or work for the city of Seattle, is another good option. But those entities, the EEOC, Human Rights Commission, and Office for Civil Rights, they are not representation. They are investigation, and it's often not a super robust investigation. Just going to be real with you. So you're going to want to talk to a lawyer at some point. You can talk to a lawyer at the connection stage, right? I think there might be an issue with this. What should I be thinking about, right? You can talk to a lawyer at the reporting stage. I'm writing my email to HR. What should I put in it, right? Is this the way to write this email to HR? Or you can talk to a lawyer when things get unbearable and you're ready to get the heck out. That's another great time to talk to a lawyer. If you have questions about this, be sure to drop them into the chat. And next slide, please. All right, so that is the promised slide that includes information about the LGBTQ+ legal clinic with a link to our website, qlawfoundation.org. And you can also call our intake line if you want to make an appointment at 206-235-7235. But we do have online clinic appointments at qlawfoundation.org. So, you know, if you have insomnia at 2 in the morning, like I did last night, and you decide you want to make your legal clinic appointment, you can just go online at any time that is convenient for you and make an appointment to talk to a lawyer. I also do workplace trainings and coalition building and work within the legal system. So if you want to talk to me about that, or have me come and give a similar presentation like this to a community group or another group of folks, or you just, you know, feel like you've got maybe a super duper sticky situation, go ahead and reach out to me. Thank you. And I know, Stephanie, you have, I think you might have contact info too. There you go.
I do. So, of course, lest we forget, this book is available for pre-order on my website, stephaniebatalino.com. You can reach me on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all those things. And I have done many talks and trainings at various companies. With Pride Month's coming up soon, would be happy to speak at any of your companies should the need arise. And again, if you'd like to pre-order my book, you can do that on my website. And I'm just really thrilled to be able to do this again with you, Denise. So do any of the people that are on have any questions for Denise and I?
Yes, we can pause for one more awkward moment to get any questions in the chat.
Oh, there I am.
All right. Well, I guess we solved all of their workplace problems, Stephanie.
I think we did. I think we did. I think that the state of Washington workplace situation is better at this hour than it was an hour earlier when we started. So it's all good.
That's right. That's right. Good. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to Traction
everybody
for having us. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. Yay!
You guys rock. Thank you. Yay.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Have a wonderful night, everyone.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.